Dr. Castleberry here with, I don't know, the next part in the video lecture series for week 2 of Communication and Cultural Change. We're getting so deep. We are in the deep end of television discourse here, pulling our texts apart, televisual and scholarly, and looking at student questions that drive this asynchronous discussion. So I'm in the middle of some Q&A with Elizabeth. She's bringing a lot of intriguing thoughts to the table. Looking back at Mattel's television and American culture, Mattel talks about how news coverage brought people together in the 60s. Yes, and it also divided others. But perhaps not intentionally, right? They had an intent to bring people together. These days, it seems like news coverage has divided us. And this comes up so frequently in our class for many of you all. We can essentially concur, but maybe we don't have the hard science on that yet. Your news channel of choice has become important, if not more, than what your actual political affiliation is. I know this is a question with so many available answers, but what happened? Is it because people have changed networks, or both, right? In a sense, or have we changed? Is it about the changes in the networks? I think intent has changed, right? We've changed from maybe at one point media held closer to journalistic ethics and standards, and believing in the public good, seeing TV as that democratic institution that so many of you picked up on in week 1, and we read about in week 2 from Mattel's TV and American Culture, right? Seeing it as that at a certain point in time, whereas now, today, we have it's even these buzzwords like InfoWars and this kind of stuff, fake news. These are attention grabbers because there are so many channels, there are so many competing mediums, desperate for audiences, that they have to automatically not drift but pursue the sensational. And so all of a sudden the primetime news becomes less about journalistic ethics and more about opinion, right? Editorial commentary, highly subjective takes, the hot take, the never-ending endless number of panel participants that talk over one another because uncivilized behavior on TV is entertaining. Dang it. And I'm going to keep tuning in because that guy, he really likes to interrupt. And that makes me happy and want to, I don't know, have a Coke or something, right? And so when the news starts functioning closer or more like reality TV with these outbursts that are or are not scripted in advance, you can see that line being blurred between news as informative versus news as entertainment. Thus, we arrive to that cultural term that we refer to as infotainment. But there is a fundamental manipulation of audiences in the spirit of viewership and profitability that ultimately corrupts and unfortunately stagnates both the ethics of the cable news channel specifically and the desire for upright civic engagement among audiences, right? So there's your bummer of a response there. Mattel brings up media bias in chapter 4, page 139. I feel like you have to live under a rock not to be aware of this between politicians and everyday Americans. My selfish wish is for a news channel with that NPR type idealism, but I know I'm dreaming. Do you think we'll ever get to a place where major news channels won't lean one way or another? Check out, because I know you subscribe to HBO, Elizabeth, and just I think I said that in one way and didn't mean it. Whatever, intent is so subjective these days. Knowing that you're a subscriber, have you watched or checked out oh shoot, why am I drawing a blank? I'm going to pause that thought. I'm going to come back to it when it comes back to my head. It's momentarily escaped. But there is a series about the news, about the newsroom, right? Aaron Sorkin's The Newsroom, starring Jeff Daniels and it's a whole cast, right? Ensemble. It only ran 3 seasons, so you can blaze through it. But Aaron Sorkin's been accused, even self-accusatory, of being an idealist and writing idyllic character. Or characters. Okay, so in other words, non-realistic. And there's a sense that show has been described as at times self-righteous, including its protagonist character played by Jeff Daniels. But there's a silver lining to that show, and it's trying to be hopeful and optimistic at a time that was highly cynical in the American news, cycle. Psychodrama, and there's something going on in that text that I do find fascinating and very noteworthy show, right? So put a pin on that show, put it on, everyone put it on your, what do you call it? Everyone's got their, my to watch list is expanding. There you go. Check it out. Let me jump down. Mattel, let's jump to the complex TV questions, okay? Mattel talks about DVDs in chapter 1 on page 36 and talks about the coming of TV on DVD. I remember DVD is extremely popular, and while I still own and purchase some Blu-rays, my exposure to them has dwindled. You're not alone. You're not alone. That is a across-the-board phenomenon. I remember when we first started using Netflix and you could rent the actual DVDs. I remember that too. I didn't have it then, but I remember that. I had friends that did that. Do you think TV on DVD is still as relevant today? No. Or has that ship sailed? Almost. But there's still a collector's market. And that's where things like, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, like Criterion, the Criterion Collection, these companies that go back and refurbish, remaster films, and put together all these supplemental materials, but make them look great and new again. I mean, there's a collector's market for this kind of stuff, and there will be. I have heard many people lament. I was listening to a podcast, and I would recommend it, and we're going to sample some of it in future courses. It's called Media and the End of the World, put together, produced by some of our friends down the road at the University of Oklahoma, Gaylord School of Journalism, and they were lamenting on, I want to say more than one episode, the decline, the twilight of DVD sales. One of the things lost in that process is that we lose access to the rich supplemental materials, like all the commentary tracks and behind the scenes interviews and things like that. Those are important documents to a lot of people. Those kinds of archival materials are very rich sources, even for research, right? Even for our research purposes, but especially for establishing context and studying history and stuff. So that market will still be there, but there's always a way in which to pull the consumer back in, right? So just as that market declined, we had the streaming services arise, just as you think, oh, they claim you can't get any clearer than Blu-ray. Oh, well, all of a sudden we've got Ultra HD 4K, right? 4K this, 4K that, 4K TVs, 4K DVD players. So we're pretty media obsessed culture. So part of me believes it's going to be archived somewhere. Maybe it just becomes more expensive to get to, though. And that is class warfare. Okay, so in chapter 2, Mattel talks about how important the beginning narrative of a show is. Ooh, love the beginning narrative. I agree that a show's beginning can be what defines it. Breaking Bad worked its way backward for its viewers, making you feel the need to watch several more episodes before you could understand what was going on. This was a fantastic trick used throughout, I believe, I'm right on this, season 2. Season 2, every episode starts with an ominous teaser, right? I'm not going to identify what it is, but it's a teaser that does not get resolved until the season finale. Phenomenal technique. It's techniques like that that made that show such an iconoclast, and a reason people, scholars all over the map, writing about it, all the critics, lavishing all the praise despite all the, toxic masculinity issues, all the depraved, acts that maybe take place on screen, that sort of thing, right? The really, really dark themes, the storytelling effort is so strong with this series. It's why it's an all-time great. Yeah. So, other shows, Parks and Rec being in this category of holding a solid place, but having a shaky or weak opening season, first season, for sure. This goes back to a question we engaged earlier about that giving a series, giving the writers and the creators the flexibility, the leniency to work out the kinks of a given show, of the product. And sometimes for TV shows, this is a product that must take place before our very eyes, right? Episode to episode. And you can sometimes sense the writers gaining more and more confidence with what they want to achieve with the storytelling. But other shaky, Elizabeth mentions Parks and Rec. Absolutely, it's in that list of weak first seasons that don't really align with the way the show goes on to become. Season 1 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, not great. I mean, just not great compared to how tremendous and rewarding the text later becomes. Star Trek's pilot. Have any of you ever watched the original Star Trek pilot from the late 60s, 1967? Maybe it's shot even in 66. It has a different captain, okay? Captain Kirk isn't even in the pilot episode. Game of Thrones, a text we talk about. A lot of people in our classes are familiar with this show. Game of Thrones reshot parts of their pilot, right? Like half of it was reshot a long time later. They recast a key figure too, if I'm not mistaken. There are certain, even things like Tyrion Lannister is closer to the book. A series, he has sort of a blonde hair in the pilot episode, but later on it morphs into more of a natural color in line with like Peter Dinklage's look. And so lots of different things can happen from when a pilot is produced to when it becomes a TV show. *Halt and Catch Fire*. This is a crime that so few people have seen this series. It aired for only 4 seasons. I think it was only 4 seasons on AMC. It recently concluded this past summer. And the first season is shaky at times. There's some real question marks. And like, what are you trying to do? What is the purpose of this character's action? A lot of ambiguity, and not like the interesting kind. The kind where it's like, are you just trying to cash in and be something else? But then it's the last few episodes there, it gained some momentum, but it's the season 2, it's the season 3, and some critics would argue the final season 4, where it comes to stand as something worthy of recognition. So *Halt and Catch Fire* there. There's a show about the railroad, the building of the railroad, another AMC drama, *Hell on Wheels*. It had kind of a cult following. It was never huge like other shows, critical darling like *Mad Men*, or audience darling like *Breaking Bad* or *The Walking Dead*. But it struggled to find its own tone. And there's a lot of genre mixing even of Western influences in that show. It's a period Western, okay? Building the railroad should have tipped you off there. But, and I've heard a lot of criticism, I've read a lot of criticism about Fear the Walking Dead as a show that needs to be its own thing separate from the master text, but still struggles for seasons to kind of develop its own unique voice and purpose. So those are some instances to think about there. Great questions. And yeah, we're gonna wrap this up with one more session, and we will be on to week 3. We'll be on to bigger and more prominent goals. All right, be right back.